Hello, everyone. This is Gary Price, and it's time for another open access interview. Today, we're going to Manchester, England, and speak with Dr. Frances Pinter, founder of Knowledge Unlatched.
Thank you very much, Gary. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've been in academic publishing most of my working life, which now spans more decades than I want to say. And I have been in the business when it was terribly frustrating because books were printed as books and they couldn't get out. And now we have the ability of digital affordances, but I found when I was working for the Soros Foundation and out in the field in the former communist bloc countries, lots and lots of libraries that were empty. And so I'm passionate and have always spent my life trying to facilitate access to knowledge, whether as an independent publisher running my company, Pinter Publishers, working for Bloomsbury Academic, working for the Soros Foundation, setting up EIFL, Electronic Information for Libraries Consortium, and now Knowledge Unlatched, while also being CEO of Manchester University Press.
When did you see the open access movement that we're all working with now begin?
Okay, well, my introduction to this was a phone call when I was in France from a guy from California who I didn't know very well, didn't know him at all, and he wanted some advice on how to use Creative Commons licensing in developing countries, and that was Larry Lessig. So I started working with Larry. I started working on some projects in Africa using Creative Commons licensing, and then I could see the potential, and I was just so excited about it. And I was invited to set up Bloomsbury Academic as an imprint of Bloomsbury, and I said to them, as a new academic imprint, you need a USP, and here is one. Let's focus on open access using Creative Commons licensing. And so that's how I became interested in and began to see the potential.
Are libraries and publishers working together in the best way possible?
Well, library-publisher relations have, in the last few years, I think everybody will agree, hit an all-time low. And we all know why. The pressure due to obsolete business models in the journals world is not conducive to libraries and publishers working well together. But I would say that in my area, which is humanities and social sciences and the university press world, there is a better basis for good relations. I think libraries and publishers have got to work together to solve this open access issue. That's what Knowledge Unlatched, of course, is trying to do, and the collaboration between libraries and publishers is just terrific. They're really great.
From your perspective, are libraries doing the best job possible in terms of promoting the whole open access movement?
Well, there are two issues here. One is the libraries explaining to their university administrators that buying or paying for something that is open and free and has potential free rider implications is a good thing. And in the early days, the biggest stumbling block were the procurement departments, because what could be receipted here? What was the library paying for this? It wasn't a book, it wasn't a subscription. What is this? So initially, most open access projects were paid for out of discretionary funding from the directors of the libraries. Now, we've moved on from there, thank God. And those discretionary funds have grown into separate open access funds. So that's kind of the university administration side. It is the case that students and researchers tend not to know whether something is bought or not bought, not paid for by their universities, because they don't see that. They go into the online environment through their university, and they don't know whether something costs the university a massive amount of money or whether they're just accessing an open access book with the URL sitting in the library catalog. So I think there's more to be done to get academics aware of the benefits of open access, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, where it's not immediately obvious. It may not be, like with medical sciences, huge benefits to medical research. But when you're doing, for instance, you're someone in an American or European university and you're doing research on Africa, and the African people that you're researching don't have the money to buy the book or the access to an online book, it's very interesting to see what happens when it is actually open access.
Because you can gain a lot more readership for the material, and you're increasing access to knowledge globally.
At Manchester University Press, we've just published over 100 books in open access, and we've been doing it for a long time. And I took a look at the usage stats and downloads for the kinds of monographs that today sell 200, 300 into libraries, very expensive monographs. The download stats over 5 years were an average of 7,000 downloads in 205 countries. I mean, that is just spectacular. Nothing can be sold in 205 countries.
Do you still see any resistance to a lot of this, because the idea that if it's free, there's no value to it, that it's not as good as something that you have to pay for?
If I may say so, that's kind of an older generation comment, and
Right.
My generation might feel that. The born digital natives don't feel that at all. They can't figure out why knowledge isn't free to access.
Absolutely. But wasn't there in the early days of open access, would you say there was sometimes people were questioning the value of the material, whether it be an open access book or a journal article, because it's free?
Yeah, but I think branding has become more important, and that's
Right.
something that university presses really recognize and rightly benefit from the fact that people know that they invest in improving the quality of the books. That's what they're there for. That's their raison d'etre. So I think it's kind of along the same lines when we first went online with anything at all. If you didn't have a printed book, it wasn't a real book. Well, no one thinks that anymore about ebooks.
Let's talk a little bit about Knowledge Unlatched. Can you tell us about your thought process to when you first said, we need this type of service, we need this type of product?
Okay, so back in '99, when I was working for George Soros, I set up something called EIFL, Electronic Information for Libraries, and we got 3,000 journals being made available in 30 different countries. It's grown now to 50. But I could see the power of aggregating that demand and facilitating it through the library network. Now we call it crowdsourcing. So I took those two ideas, and I was invited to a Tools of Change conference when I was quite new at Bloomsbury Academic in New York, and I had to think of something new to say about open access and Creative Commons, and I suddenly had this idea, take the Eiffel idea, take the Kickstarter idea, put it together, take the money, source the money from a very distinguished group of Kickstarters, which are the libraries and their acquisitions budgets, their collections budgets. So I tried this out at a Tool of Change conference, and there were 1,000 people there. And as you know, in that kind of setting, it's dark. The light's on you, and you can't see your audience. So no feedback. But afterwards, Sue Palanka came rushing up to me and said, "This is fantastic. You got to do it." And so from there onwards, I developed the idea. I didn't have a name for it. I spent 2 years talking about it to different groups of people and said, "A bottle of champagne to anybody who will come up with a good name for this concept." And in the end, my husband came up with the name, so I drank half the bottle of the champagne.
So now you've got the idea, you've got the name. When you talk to publishers, they like the idea, but they were quick to say that librarians wouldn't like it. And when you spoke to librarians, they said the publishers won't go for it. So can you talk a little bit about bringing the two groups together? And if you could share a little bit about what did the publishers think the libraries wouldn't like and vice versa?
Okay, well, it was real shuttle diplomacy. The librarians thought that publishers would dump all the worst books into the program. So to guard against that, I said, okay, we'll set up a library selections committee. So there'll be a sort of pre-selection. The publishers can submit whatever they like, but if it doesn't get through the library selection group made up of librarians, it's not going any further. It's not going out for the pledging round and to be unlatched. The publishers, I think they just felt that librarians wouldn't be willing to organize themselves in such a way. And the people that I remember the most in that era were the consultants. And the consultants all said, free rider, nobody's going to play. And I had very long, convoluted discussions, and then in the end, I've got 2 words for people who still worry about free rider. I just say clocks and portico. Because actually, when the library community wants to do something and the publisher community want to do something that's in the interest of both communities, they do it. And so the way that Knowledge Unlatched is constructed, we have these rounds, and the publishers submit the titles. The library selection committee prunes the long list down to a short list, and then it goes out for pledging for a few months, and we promote it to the library community, and we get their pledges, and then if we get enough pledges, and we're looking at between 250, 300 libraries minimum to pledge a capped amount, then we say, okay, we're going to unlatch these books. The publishers give us a PDF, the libraries get an invoice, we load the PDF onto OAPN and HathiTrust, and it goes open access. We provide MARC records, we put it into Portico and clocks just in case the publisher hasn't, and it goes open access, and we watch the usage grow.
What kind of responses are you getting from publishers? For example, one thing we always hear, more use, wider use will also create more visibility and potentially sales for publishers. Have you seen that has that been the case so far with Knowledge Unlatched?
Yes, it has. So the question is, how are sales doing? There isn't that much data yet, but at the end of the day, and certainly what I saw at Bloomsbury, where we had books open access quite early on, and Manchester, the better books will sell more. And the books that are of less interest won't sell as many. But particularly in the humanities and social sciences, there are still people who would like to buy the printed book, and they do buy the printed book.
And having the books more widely available, at least for people to discover, then creates more sales.
Yeah, and sometimes concepts get picked up very quickly in a way that they might not have done in the past. For example, there was a book I published at Bloomsbury called The Precariat, and nobody knew what the word precariat meant. But because the author himself was on the campaign trail to get the word precariat known, it became a very widely bought trade paperback out of what had started life as a monograph.
Are some of the titles that are in Knowledge Unlatched over the first couple of rounds, are some of them more mainstream, if you like?
Oh yeah, I mean there are some books on climate change issues that have been very popular, and actually some authors have told us that they take more trouble to write really better because they know that more people are going to be reading their books.
Could you talk a little bit about some of the publishers you're working with at this point?
Okay, well, the pilot had 13 publishers, and 9 of them were university presses from America, UK, and continental Europe. The second round had 26 publishers. All 13 of the initial publishers came back, and we added an Australian publisher. And in the third round that we've just launched, we have a mailing list of 100 publishers that have expressed interest since the second round, and who are being invited to submit titles now to the third round. I don't know how many of those 100 will actually participate, but it's a pretty good starting point.